So, good afternoon. My name is Jeff Niermeyer. I'm the director of the Salt Lake City Department of Public Utilities, and we appreciate you gathering together. And we're just kind of like to give you a little update on the oil spill that's going in at the top end of Parleys Canyon. Early this morning, there was a tanker wreck that was bringing some crude oil in out of the Uinta Basin. It's a very heavy, waxy crude. Tanker truck tipped over and spilled what has been estimated to be about 4,500 gallons of this crude oil. Much of it ended up on the freeway, but some of it did end up going down in through drain inlet and got into the very headwaters of Parleys Creek. And that's where we got involved along with the Salt Lake County Health Department, because those are headwaters to a water source for our culinary water supply here in Salt Lake City. I am happy to report that the spill has been well contained, although some has gotten into the very headwaters. Because of the heavy nature, waxiness of this crude, it doesn't migrate very fast. So there are booms put in place that are containing it. They're in the process of building a siphon dam in case to limit any future migration. But it's really only hit probably less than 100 feet of active stream and is being contained. Between my agency and the health department, we have taken some water quality samples just to be proactive to make sure that nothing is going downstream, that we can monitor it in the future after the remediation company has cleaned it up. The trunking company has brought a remediation contractor on site, and they're up there cleaning it up. And so at this point, it's over about 3.5 miles from intakes to our water reservoir, Mountain Dell, and so the city's water supply is not in any danger at this point in time, but we're being very proactive in putting measures in place to make sure that that continues to be the case. So with that, maybe I'll turn it over to Gary Edwards, the health department. What your agency's doing.
Thank you, Jeff. Not a lot to add to what Mr. Niermeyer explained to you. We've had staff at the site since early in the incident, working with containing and working with some initial sampling, taking initial samples of water, also taking some samples of the oil so we knew for sure what to be looking for in any future water sampling, what type of materials to be looking for within that. We will continue to monitor the remediation. As Mr. Niermeyer indicated, the oil does not seem to be moving downstream. The booms that have been in place since early this morning have contained what has entered the creek, and examining the creek down below, visual examination is not showing any signs of an oil sheen that we would expect to see if contamination was progressing. With that,
can you talk about the numbers, what you think might have gone into the soil, how you're able to remediate it, and how much, if any, might still be remaining, and maybe some long-term impact related to that?
From those on scene yet, they have not been able to give to us. We know that it was somewhere between 4,000 and 5,000 gallons in the truck that spilled, but they have not been able to give us an accurate estimate on how much progressed from the road down the embankment into the storm drain and eventually to the creek. So we don't have that yet.
How big was the tanker? How much oil could it hold?
How much it could hold, I don't know. I know that there was between 4,000 and 5,000 gallons that spilled.
Is this a Tesoro truck, or was this headed for the Tesoro refinery?
Yeah, the refinery, I'm not sure which refinery it was headed to, but the trucks are really owned by independent trucking companies, and so it was a trucking company that was up on site representing the owners of the truck. But it was not associated that we know directly with an oil company.
It was not.
The trucking, again, they're typically independent contractors hauling oil to the refinery.
Okay, but you don't know which refinery it was headed to.
We don't, for sure.
Because I know that Tesoro is the one locally that had, sought a permit a while back to transport this waxy crude, no? From the Uinta Basin here to Salt Lake City? Is that not the case?
They're in the process right now of working on a new pipeline called the Uinta pipeline that's currently going through the first phases of an environmental review. And that is being proposed by Tesoro. But there are, again, multiple refineries, as I understand it, at least 3, that can treat this waxy crude.
3 here in Utah?
Yes.
Okay, so you're not sure. Are you going to find out, is that going to be part of what you're looking into, is exactly where this is headed?
I think, yeah, under the investigation that the health department will do along with us is, whereas it's, you know, if you read the material for the Uinta pipeline, you know, they talk about upwards of several hundred of these vehicles traversing that section of highway every day now.
So talk about, is there concern over that, the fact that there could be more trucks carrying this stuff?
Again, that's a concern that there's more trucks, and that's, you know, one of the reasons that the oil company is looking at a pipeline. That also has a whole level of concern with that, as well as we've found out with other pipelines in this area. So again, what we're looking at least from a watershed perspective, is that how do we have mitigation measures in place? And we had very good mitigations, you know. The cooperation between our agencies, the early notification, getting up on site, having booms and response equipment really allowed us to minimize the impacts of this particular spill. And so I think what we've learned in previous oil spills is that this important relationship that we have to maintain, not only between ourselves as kind of the regulatory agencies, but also with the emergency responders. So, you know, the Salt Lake County Fire Department, the Unified Fire Department responded with their hazmat crews and were able to help contain it. So again, it's this ongoing training and coordination between multiple agencies that's really important, because unfortunately or fortunately, you know, we live in an environment where we rely on oil, and as a result of that, we end up having to deal with these spills.
Does the city have oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
No. Does the city have a position on that pipeline? I mean, we've had so many incidents here in Salt Lake already. It seems like, you know, every year there's a big oil spill.
Yeah, we wrote an 11-page letter commenting on the pipeline, where we raised the history we've had with oil spills in the past. There are multiple alignments proposed, and you know, one of them followed the existing pipeline corridor in there, where we know we've had problems, so we were quite negative towards that position. We also rose, you know, the entire issue of, you know, air quality, and you know, continue to refining this crude in the Salt Lake Valley. And there's, you know, air quality from truck traffic, there's air quality from refining, and is now maybe the time to look at refining it somewhere else. And those are some of the issues we raised in our letter that we hope the Forest Service, as they go through their environmental review of the proposed pipeline, will incorporate in their NEPA analysis.
Does trucking or a pipeline present a greater risk to our watershed?
I think both of them present different risks. So if you have a pipeline that leaks and continues, as we've seen, and pumps water into our watershed, that's a concern. If we have trucks that get in accidents and get water into our watershed, that's a concern. So I think they both present concerns in terms of our environment and our watershed, and whether or not they're at the same level, it really depends on actually where the break occurs in the pipeline or where the truck happened to turn over. But they both actually potentially have impacts to our drinking water supply. And that's, since our days in the previous Red Butte oil spill, I have worked really hard with the various oil companies to make sure that they understand the reliance on over 1 million people in this, you know, the Salt Lake, Northern Utah County, and Davis County, that rely on these watersheds, and that spills of oil have tremendous consequences to our public drinking water supply.
So the spill has been contained. Has any earth been excavated and hauled out of there? Has any of the actual crude that made it to the soil or anywhere been removed?
They haven't started that. When I left about an hour ago, they were starting to build a siphon dam. Just again, what they try and do is to harden the response to make sure that you put in one layer of containment, then you go downstream and you put in another layer of containment and then a redundant one below that, just to make sure nothing gets past and migrates down. They were working on those containments. They did have the heavy equipment starting to come up, and they'll actually have to work with the health department to come up with this remediation plan and sampling plan to document how much of the contaminated soil is being removed, and then how are they going to then demonstrate that they've gotten it, and doing testing to document that contamination in fact has been removed.
With this yellow wax crude, what kind of concern would there be long-term related to groundwater or anything like that you're aware of?
Again, from what I know, and I'm not a yellow wax crude expert by any stretch of the imagination, is that it tends to solidify. Its melting point is 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and so it tends to get very globby and is very easy to dig up, and so it's not something that penetrates deep down into the soil. So as long as temperatures have been relatively cool, as long as they can dig down, they should be able to remove it all.
Do you feel like you have any, any muscle or any, like you talked about how the city does not approve of the pipeline in one location. Do you feel like you can do anything to persuade that process or to have a voice in that process?
No, absolutely. I think the NEPA process by its very design is encouraged to have not only my role, where we view ourselves as a very significant stakeholder representing a lot of people's interests, but everybody can have a voice in that. And by putting comments in and participating in the NEPA process, it's designed to look at what is this alternative, what are the connected projects that this project will develop, and how are they interrelate in terms of environmental impact, or in some cases, benefit. So I do believe that there is a rigorous process, and the city is fully engaged, participating in it. And I know I've talked with other of my water agencies that I routinely deal with, and they have all actively participated in it. Again, getting water supply on the radar screen so that it's analyzed in the upcoming NEPA process. National Environmental Protection Act.
Jeff, could you show us on this map how far the oil has been noticed? You said that 100 feet of creek has been, I guess,
Right.
What is it that's happened in that 100 feet of creek?
So essentially, this is where the spill occurred, and there's a culvert that crosses under, so there's an inlet where it basically, the oil got in two ways. It went down that inlet, and that inlet's tied into a crossing of a culvert that crosses under the road, and then some of it just spilled down the embankment and is working its way. But the oil is only, and I have a more detailed map I'd be glad to show you, but the oil has really only come down to about here. And so it's only traveled about this far, and our treatment plant and reservoir is over 3.5 miles below that. So it's really been limited to this area right here.
But some of the oil has hit the creek, correct?
It's right at the very headwaters. This is kind of right where Parleys Creek begins.
And did you say earlier that 100 feet of that creek?
It's about 100 feet. Has really been, just eyeballing the distance that it had really traveled down the stream.
And you feel like you can get all that stuff out of the water?
Yes.
You can.
So with
The
remedial
remedial contractor came.
And who's paying for all this in this case?
Probably the insurance company for the trucking.
So remediation dams then go where, and what
Siphon
specifically
dam.
do they siphon dams?
The siphon dam will basically just come down here, and what that'll do is, and it's not projected, but if we got like a big rainstorm or something like that, what a siphon dam does is any oil likes to float on a surface. So you build the stream's only about this wide at this point. And so you put a pipe coming up at an angle, and you build this dam, and it backs a little bit of water up there so that any oil that happens to get past that wants to float on the top, and then the clean water comes up that pipe and goes downstream. So it's just another way of trapping any oil that potentially could have gotten loose or could get loose if we have like a rainstorm event, or there's still a little bit of snow to melt up there if it gets hot and you get a little bit more runoff. So it's just an extra measure that we're putting in place. We also went downstream and we put booms across the stream, several miles downstream at an intake structure we have, just as a precaution. Not that I anticipate the oil getting down there, but because this is our water supply, I'm taking a lot of extra precautions.
In terms of, so any of that stuff that's siphoned off, 4,500 gallons is a lot of stuff, and particularly if it soaks into soil, where does all of that go to?
Essentially what the remediation contract will Yes, what the remediation contractor will do is they will basically load that into trucks and they will haul it to a landfill that's capable of accepting that sort of oil contaminated soil. There's one locally, and depending on the profile of the oil, sometimes it's actually used, they go through a process and they use it actually for landfill cover, or sometimes if it's more contaminated and it can't be remediated through this other process, they just take it out and bury it in a landfill cell that's contained and designed for that sort of material.
How long will this all take?
I'm suspecting that they will have much of this cleaned up within the next couple of days, but the ongoing monitoring, the testing will take quite a while. I know I've already arranged with my staff and labs that we're going to be testing water quality every day now and running samples into the lab at least for a week, and then we'll monitor it from there.
So about a week before.
Right, and again, what we'll want to do between ourselves and the health department is to make sure that we are monitoring, that we do soil checking, just to confirm, in fact, that the contractor did get all of it.
And I understand, Ryan, you were saying your preference from the city standpoint is that the oil just didn't come either by pipeline or by trucks to these refining facilities?
No, I think what we're saying is that now may be the right time to look at, is it the right choice for where Salt Lake City and Salt Lake County is, to maybe look at refining this elsewhere. There's air quality issues that come with refining it here. There's a whole dialogue on tier 2 and tier 3 fuel refining, and trying to get a higher level of fuel. It wasn't too many months ago that all of us were really attuned to the impacts of bad air and our air quality, and so we just raised it in our letter, just saying it's something that we ought to look at, because every time you commit another pipeline bringing it here, you're committing that much more to refining it here. And is there an opportunity? Much of this refined product actually isn't used here. It goes south and goes north. And so the question is can you actually refine it elsewhere? Can you actually use something, rail cars to transport it and then refine it and then deliver it to places it's being used without Salt Lake City and Salt Lake County having to take the burden of that refining. And so, the refineries certainly add a lot to our economy, and there's always that balance. But I thought, this was a good time when you're proposing a new facility to be able to at least raise that, to have a public dialogue about it and include it in an analysis.
You're talking about
The pipeline.
And when are they supposed to make a decision on that?
The actual first phase of the comment scoping just closed, and so they typically, my experience, they take about a year to do that analysis. Under the scoping, they raise the issues, and then they work to analyze those issues, both the negatives and the positives, and come up with a recommendation.
How do you feel about this? Can you say how do you feel about it? It seems like deja vu all over again.
Again, my preference would be to see if we could, refine it elsewhere. I think I like to drive as well as the next person, and so, access to relatively cost-efficient fuel is important to our community. But I think as you just look at this balance between air quality and the need, the potential risk to water supply, we need to look at all alternatives. It's Niermeyer, Niermeyer. And I'll be glad to roll out this other map if somebody wants to.
Sure. So you have it on you?
I do.
Fantastic.
Do you ever known me to show up without a map, Jed?
Hey, I like maps too.
Somebody needs your help, Nora.
And then where's this boom set up?
This boom here is, I need my other map. It's not on this one. So again, that oil spill is here, and I set that boom up right here. Because there's actually a pipeline that takes water out of the creek here. It comes all the way around here and fills into Little Dell. So just on, being ultra cautious and conservative, I'm just wanting to make sure that I'm protecting down here because I don't want that oil migrating over into Little Dell or into this pipeline. And so I don't think it's going to get there. I have no indication, but I'm just being cautious because that's just the way I am.
So that creek does feed both reservoirs,
Yes.
Little Dell by pipe.
Yep. It does.